These are Sandmedia filters. This is our primary filtration method that we use. Just explain a little bit about how these work. But really, all filtration has similar concepts in the fact that we've got dirty water coming in, usually the top manifold, clean water coming out the bottom, and we're monitoring that pressure before and after the filter. That tells us when we need to backflush. So once that pressure differential gets to a set point, on this system we have like 9 psi, it triggers a backflush. It takes the clean water out of one tank, runs it backwards through the sand in this case, through these three-way valves, and cleans each tank. This does it for 90 seconds on this tank, moves it to this tank, and then back to this tank. So it's a process where it self-cleans, keeps itself clean. Again, we got dirty water coming in the top. The sand is filled up to about right here. We got a media level signature out here on the outside. Usually we inspect this sand once per year to make sure it's flowable and that we haven't lost our sand. I'll explain in a little bit how we can lose the sand. So we want to make sure there's enough sand in here at the beginning of the season, and usually once we've done that, we're good to go for the year. So again, bed of sand, and there's little mushrooms or well drain devices in the bottom of this that water goes into, and then the clean water goes out the bottom. During backflush, there's several important things to know about the backflush process. So again, the controller's deciding when to backflush. It's going to do that automatically. It's going to do one tank at a time. But in order to lift the sand properly, there has to be 25 pounds of pressure at a minimum on the bottom side of those filters. If for some reason the filters have gotten so plugged up so quickly that it can't maintain 25 pounds of pressure during backflush, it will never lift that sand and properly agitate it. So that's probably the number one issue we see with Sandmedia filters, is it'll get into what we call a death spiral, where it never can get itself clean, and it just gets dirtier and dirtier, and it tries to flush and tries to flush, and it doesn't ever get clean. So it goes into a constant backflush cycle. Make sure you check your flushing pressure during backflush. It's a very important number to know. Depending on how your field is laid out, we might install what's called a pressure sustaining normally open valve. Basically what that is, it's a valve that goes after your filter system that is normally open, so that's why it's called a normally open valve. But during backflush, it squeezes and restricts and creates back pressure on the bottom side of the filters so that the filters can have enough pressure. This is especially important if you have a field where your filter system is higher than your drip field, because you've got gravity taking that water away. You can't build up that pressure because your system continues to irrigate while you're flushing. A couple important numbers to know. These filters, I believe the 36-inch tanks that we're looking at here require about 190 gallon a minute to backflush. The 48-inch tanks require about 290 gallon a minute to backflush, so it takes quite a bit of water during that backflush process to get that sand clean. PS&O valve helps with that if you're having issues with the backflush not being aggressive enough to get the sand clean. On the flip side, the backflush can be too aggressive. And what happens when backflush is too aggressive? Let's say we're sitting in a system where we've got, maybe the drip field is higher, much higher than the irrigation system or than the filter, and the filter is down in a low area. And we've got a system in Iowa where we've got 90 pounds of pressure at the filter just to get 25 pounds of pressure to the top of the hill. And so when he goes to backflush, he's got 90 pounds of pressure trying to lift this sand, and what will happen if it's too aggressive is that sand's going to go right out this pipe. It'll lift it up, it'll be too aggressive, and it'll take it out the pipe. What we've got here is we've got a throttling valve on this backflush pipe that keeps too much water from going out the backflush. So typically we set these on installation, and then they shouldn't really be messed with. And what we do is we open this to the point that we start catching a little bit of sand after the valve. And then we close it to the point that there's very little or almost no sand coming out the backflush water. So we have to have a spot where we can catch our backflush water. We physically check it, maybe put a bucket or just catch it with your hand, and you can tell if there's some of the filter media sand that's getting past this valve. It's very important. We call this a throttling valve. It's important that it's open far enough, but not too far. On lower pressure systems, they can usually be opened all the way. But if you have flush pressures, if you have a system pressure, I would say greater than 30, 35 pounds, this valve becomes much more important and needs to be monitored very closely. Super important that those are set right. One other thing I'll point out is the command filter. On the top manifold of the filter, and this is the same whether it's a Sandmedia filter or a disc filter, we're going to have what's called a command filter. What the command filter is doing is it's filtering the water that activates these solenoids. So it's using that high pressure water to go through the solenoid, and then the solenoid they're moving these valves back and forth. And so if this filter gets plugged up, the filters won't flush. Or if this quarter turn valve gets closed, there's a quarter turn ball valve right here, that gets closed, those filters aren't going to flush even if the controller is trying to flush it. So it's important this valve stays open. It's important this filter here gets checked. Most systems, we just check it once a year and make sure it stays clean, or you'll know if your filters aren't flushing. That's one of the first things to check. Real quickly on the valve operation, these valves, they flush with pressure. So when it's trying to flush, if you want to see which valve is flushing or are my solenoids working properly, you can pop these spaghetti tubes off and flip your solenoid to open. And when you flip that solenoid to open, you'll get water here. Basically, there's a bonnet in here. When that opens, it pushes this over and moves it into the back flush stage and starts flushing. And then when it goes back to close or into auto, it vents that water out, and then there's a spring that moves the valve back into the normal filtering operation. Those are the basics of a Sandmedia filter. We've got a continuous acting air vent on the top of it. You'll also find a quick relief pressure relief valve. So this is a very important valve. Basically what this does is if the system pressure ever gets too high, it's going to automatically open up and give that water a place to vent or dump. So this valve is a 2-inch quick relief valve. These can be set using this set screw here. They typically come preset at 65 pounds of pressure. So if the system pressure gets higher than 65, this valve is going to open up and just start dumping water on top of the ground. Very important safety mechanism to protect your pipes and make sure we don't ever get too much pressure. A lot in the filtration system. It's the lifeblood of the system. It's your insurance policy. Make sure that drip system never plugs up. Okay, this is a disc filter. So again, it's a great filtration option. Some of the benefits of the disc filter is it's a smaller footprint and it uses much less backflush water. So it flushes much more efficiently. I'll go through the operation of this. So basically we've got dirty water coming in the top, goes down through our disc assemblies here, and then that clean water is coming out the bottom. We've got the pressure gauge, just like we did on the Sandmedia filter. We can check pressure before and after the filter here on a single gauge. We've got an continuous acting air vent. The actual guts of the system are these disc assemblies here. So what happens is as the material builds up on the outside, and there's actually little grooves. The red discs are 120 mesh, so that's the filtration requirement for drip irrigation is 120 mesh. And the material has to go through these interwoven discs. These are an example. These are the discs themselves. You can see they're just little discs with grooves in them that interlock. And so in order for a particle to get through there, it would have to try to weave its way down through those grooves. When it goes to backflush, this system also requires 25 pounds of pressure to properly backflush. What happens is this set of discs are going to decompress. I'm going to pull on them and you'll see this spring. There's a spring inside here that I'm pulling against that decompresses, and those discs actually spin. And so when it's backflushing, you should hear a sound. It's a whining sound if it's got enough oomph to flush itself properly. But it'll separate those, spin them, usually about 20 seconds, 25 seconds. It's flushing both sides at the same time, and then it goes down the line and does each set. So this one here is going to use a lot less water for backflushing. Does a great job. The one thing we have to watch out for on a disc filter is when it's in that backflush mode, if the backflush isn't long enough, or if we have a well that's pumping a lot of sand, particles can get in between those discs and hold them open. And so then when it goes back to the filtering mode and the disc closes back down, there's a gap, and things can get through that gap. So that's one reason, one place where we shy away from a disc filter is if we had to produce a lot of sand, we want to get rid of that sand through a sand separator or a cyclone first before we go to the disc filter. So great filtration option. That's a little bit about how the disc filter.
Okay, so these are the Backflush controller. If you don't have a drip controller, and this is what's called a standalone backflush controller. So it's monitoring the pressure in and the pressure out of the filters. And the filters are going through a backflush cycle right now as we speak. It's flushing filter 1. It's going to flush for 1.5 minutes. When the differential pressure gets to 9 psi, it's going to trigger a backflush. You can see up here on the gauge, every filter, including a Sandmedia, disc, and screen filter, are going to have these 3-way selectors. If this is pointing down, this is measuring the top manifold of the filter, meaning that's the dirty water. If we roll it over here to this selector here, that's the water coming on that's the pressure off the bottom side of the filter. Right now, we've got about 12 pounds of pressure differential between the top and bottom side of these two filters. So we're losing quite a bit of these. Filters are plugged. They're trying to flush right now. And so it's going to flush each filter for 1 minute to clean that back out. So these pressure gauges at the top and this selector are very important for operating and monitoring what your filters are doing and how they're performing.